So welcome to the Botanic Gardens Biosecurity webinar series. I'm Daniela Carnival. I'm from Plant Health Australia and I'm from the Botanic Gardens Biosecurity Network. This webinar series is being coordinated by the Botanic Gardens Biosecurity Network. Now, this network is coordinated by Plant Health Australia with support from expert collaborators. The project is funded by the Australian Government's Agricultural Competitiveness White Paper, which is the government's plan for stronger farms and a stronger economy. Now, before we jump into today's webinar, I'd like to just go through some quick webinar housekeeping things. So today, all attendees will be on mute. And we also have a panel here today with us, which are comprised of members of the Peri-urban Biosecurity Network team, who will be on board to hopefully help answer any questions that may be coming throughout the webinar. So throughout today's webinar, we encourage you to use the chat box function to ask any questions that you have to the panelists or to everyone throughout the webinar. So we do encourage you to put those questions in. We will be trying to get those questions at the end of the webinar and answering those in a bit of a Q&A discussion at the end of the webinar, if time permits. If we run out of time, we will take those questions on board and hopefully provide a written response to all attendees. The webinar is also being recorded and will be made available after the webinar on the Extension Oz Botanic Gardens Biosecurity Network website, as well as the PHA YouTube channel. Now let's jump straight into today's webinar. Looking out for environmental pests. And this is being brought to you by the Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity Network. Now, this network is very much like the Botanic Gardens Biosecurity Network, as well as the Urban Plant Health Network that you heard from a few weeks ago. The Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity Network it aims to connect New South Wales communities and experts to improve community biosecurity awareness and to increase participation in general surveillance of environmental pests in urban areas. Now today, our webinar will consist of 4 presentations. The first presentation will be by Elyse, who's the Director of Strategy and Support at the Environmental Biosecurity Office. And she will give an introduction to environmental biosecurity. Our second talk will be by Eva, who's a Community Engagement Officer at Local Land Services Hunter, and she will provide a case study looking at cane toads reported by the public. Our third presenter will be Dr. Adrian, who's a Senior Research Entomologist at Biosecurity and Food Safety at the Department of Regional New South Wales, and he'll also provide another case study, but this time he'll be presenting it on red imported fire ants. And then finally, we will have Rachel, who is a Plant Biosecurity Officer at New South Wales DPI, who will talk a little bit about how to report plant pests and diseases within New South Wales. So as we mentioned, we do have a very jam-packed webinar today, so we'll get straight into the first presentation and I'll hand over now to Elyse.
So my name is Elyse Herrald-Woods. I am the Director of Strategy and Support for the Environmental Biosecurity Office in the Australian Government Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. My team's primary role is to support Australia's Chief Environmental Biosecurity Officer, Mr. Ian Thompson, to fulfil his responsibilities. And this includes the administration of an annual Environmental Biosecurity Project Fund, which is how we're supporting the Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity Network. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the various lands on which we all are coming together to meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Environmental biosecurity is important, and unfortunately, to some extent with COVID, biosecurity is now, in general, is front of mind for a lot of people. So we'll just move on to the next slide. Thanks. So we do have a lot of challenges to our biosecurity system, and the biosecurity system in general is the imports that come into our country, and imports include passenger movements, trade, all of the goods, the logistics, all of those sorts of things, as well as then what we are sending back out into the world with our own agricultural products, but also our own people that are going back overseas. So we are still facing increasing volumes of international trade. Climate change is also, as we're all aware, a huge challenge. And there's an increasing complexity of global supply chains, which mean we need to adapt to increasing and varying biosecurity risks. I'm sure many of you are aware that COVID has seen passenger movement significantly decreased, but our mail interceptions have gone up by 50% over the 4-month period from January to April. We had 30,000 interceptions, more than 9,000 more than the same period last year, and this included more than 26,000 mail items containing seeds. Of course, not everything can be stopped at the border. There's a lot of material, it can be very cryptic, and of course some things blow in on the wind. So some of you might be familiar with fall armyworm, which has recently appeared in Northern Australia. We have also unfortunately sent myrtle rust on the wind to Norfolk Island and to New Zealand, so they're not very happy with us about that. Next slide. For many of you, environmental biosecurity might seem an unfamiliar term at first glance, but in very simple terms, it protects our way of life, and it allows us to enjoy things like our botanic gardens, our backyards, our street trees, our national parks, and of course our unique flora and fauna by managing the risks of exotic pests, weeds and diseases from coming into the country. It also reduces threats to our biodiversity by managing the risks of invasive alien species. The assets that are protected by agricultural and environmental biosecurity are enormous. As you can see, it's in the billions and trillions of dollars, and these figures are a little bit old at the moment. We've just got some research, some work that's been undertaken to update those, but I can assure you it is still very much in the billions and trillions. Environmental biosecurity in particular also protects those things that cannot and we should never assign an economic value, and that includes the cultural heritage of our First Nations peoples. So biosecurity is a partnership. While governments at all levels are involved, there is also a really important role for the community and individuals. This is particularly the case in the environmental space. The Commonwealth's role is about preventing exotic pests, weeds and diseases from arriving in Australia in the first place, while the states and territories lead in controlling what is here and what is spreading. But individuals, as you can see from this little diagram on the slide, need to act too. Everyone does have a role. The general public, as well as farmers on farm, including farms and other land holdings in peri-urban areas. The Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity Network has been set up to support individuals to act by connecting experts in environmental biosecurity with peri-urban communities in New South Wales, so that they can work together to protect the environment from the impact of exotic pests and diseases. There are a range of unique characteristics of peri-urban areas that make their role in environmental biosecurity quite important, including that many land holdings have patches of native ecological communities still on them, and or they adjoin national parks, bush reserves and other recreational areas. And it's really important to protect these places as they provide habitat for native plants, animals and insects, as well as giving people a place to explore and enjoy the great outdoors. So it is in everyone's interest to ensure these habitats are healthy, and the network of experts has been set up to help with that. Next slide. So as I mentioned, it is a shared responsibility. A lot of biosecurity, of course, is science-based. We have a lot of scientists in our department. New South Wales DPI has a lot of scientists in their department. But doing anything about all of this, especially in the environmental biosecurity space, is all about the people. People are our biggest biosecurity vector. We have traders, we have travellers, we've got criminals. But people are also our greatest asset for action. If we can persuade you to join with us and then usefully harness what you can give us, there's some great outcomes that we're able to achieve. So we're looking more and more to community groups to keep doing what they're doing, but with a new intent and a greater understanding. And we want to support them through this by reporting through citizen science apps and developing networks like the Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity Network. Through building this capacity, the network hopes to empower small landholders to help spread knowledge about biosecurity and improve community awareness and participation of general surveillance in environmental biosecurity risks. And that's as simple as keeping an eye out for unusual animals, insects, or new signs of pests and diseases and reporting them. And as I've noted, in turn, this helps contribute to a healthier environment. So we're investing as the federal government in this pilot project as the approach delivers on a number of government priorities when it comes to general surveillance, as well as bringing together expertise and effort to deliver stronger outcomes for environmental biosecurity. It also, we think, will help us deliver on what we see as the potential for community-wide understanding and ownership of biosecurity, equal that of bushfire preparedness and response. So it's a real joining together and a real community effort. So I'd like to leave you all with the question of what are the 3 things that you can do to help strengthen our environmental biosecurity outcomes? It might be downloading that reporting app you've heard about, might be double checking where that online seller of seeds is actually based. Hint, it is most likely not Australia. Or cleaning your shoes before your next bushwalk and making that a habit. It could also be recommending to your neighbour that they subscribe to the Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity webpage after signing up yourself, of course. So thank you very much for this opportunity to tell you about our work. And I'll now hand over to Eva from Local Land Services Hunter to talk about cane toads reported by the public. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you about cane toads in the Hunter region. Just, I suppose, an overview of some of our recent sightings and reports in the Hunter, and also just some case studies on how to report, or what some of the community have been doing to report a suspected cane toad. Cane toads in the Hunter region. First reports of cane toads in the Hunter was back in 1992. Cane toads have been known to regularly hitchhike into the Hunter region from Queensland, from the core cane toad populations of Queensland and northern New South Wales, often via transportation trucks and domestic vehicles. What we're finding is that cane toads are showing up in mulch and in plants through landscaping companies, and also domestic vehicles and things like caravans, and just the domestic vehicles. So if you have a look at the map just on the screen here, there's been a number of sightings since 2017, and some examples of where they've been turning up in Wallsend. They were found at a Bunnings in Wallsend, right next to a wetland, as you can see there, and suspected that it had come from mulch. And also in Metford, just to north of Wallsend. So this is all in the Lower Hunter region Lower Hunter region. And then there's in Metford, 2 cane toads were found, and that was just on a residential property, also suspected to have come from mulch. And there's just up here in Medowie, just to the east of Metford, another sighting there there was a cane toad found just outside the local school there. So since 2017, there's been an increase in the number of reports and sightings. In 2017, there were 3 reports. In 2018, there were 3 reports as well. And 2019, we found there were 5 reports. And this is just confirmed sightings. So we found that we've had a lot more reports, and what we're finding is that people are reporting or misidentifying native frogs for cane toads. So that's been quite alarming for us. And in this next slide, we've got a map here also in an additional 3 cane toad sightings in the Hunter region in early 2020. So the number of confirmed sightings is definitely on the increase. So threats to native wildlife. Cane toads have no natural predators in Australia, and they're capable of decimating all fauna species, especially in newly invaded areas. So if cane toads were to establish in the Hunter region, they would contribute to the serious decline or even extinction of some of our most vulnerable and endangered wildlife, species including Australasian bittern, spotted-tailed quolls, powerful owls, green and golden bell frogs. And cane toads, their defence mechanism, if they feel they're under attack or under threat, is to excrete a poison from their bodies. And not only is that the poison that they excrete the poison they excrete is poisonous, but also their entire bodies are poisonous, so including their internal organs, and at the tadpole and egg stage, they are also toxic as well. So native species really don't have much of a chance. So this is why it's so important for community, local councils and state government agencies to work together in reporting, identification and raising awareness of the potential threat cane toads have on our wildlife. And also it's just really important to just know that cane toads are coming into the Hunter region generally. So responding to new incursions. In light of the increasing reports and sightings, Hunter Local Land Services, Department of Primary Industries, councils and national parks, so we're working together to develop two response plans, which one is the High Risk Sites Pathway Action Plan and the Community Awareness and Training Plan. So these plans provide direction in developing community workshops and spotlight nights in response to any new incursions. And we've been doing just that since 2018, working in with councils and Department of Primary Industries. We've undertaken 6 community cane toad and native frog workshops, and that was followed by a spotlight night at 3 locations in the Lower Hunter, where there were sightings, nearby sightings. And earlier this year, the sighting at the record at Blackhead and Salamander Bay, we responded in through organising a spotlight night at these 2 locations, following the sighting at those 2 sites there. So citizen science, a case study here. This is a really good example of a family that were fairly quick thinking. Bateman's Bay family were using a frog ID app. So you can see that the app logo on the right-hand side of the screen. This is a family that are generally interested in native frogs, and they use this app to identify native frogs, and came across a call that they were not familiar with. One of the family members actually thought it might have been a cane toad. So the family recorded the suspected cane toad, which was in a creek just behind their property. and the recording was used to attract and then catch the cane toad the following night. The cane toad was identified to be an adult male and most likely hitchhiked on the back of a transportation truck. So the family did the right thing and contacted local council and local land services invasive species officers to confirm that it was a cane toad. So after this, the local land services and Eurobodella Council and a local frog expert undertook 4 intensive follow-up surveys just to make sure that there were no cane toads in the nearby creeks and waterways. And there were no cane toads found, just many different frog species. So there are just 3 simple steps in reporting a suspected cane toad. So take a photo and record the location. This can be done using the Feral Scan app or Toad Scan, and you can download that app and you can record the location of the cane toad. If possible, capture the animal and place it in a small aerated and covered box with some water in a quiet area. You don't want to stress the animal out, because at this stage you really do not know whether it is a native frog or a cane toad. Report the animal to the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries by using the online web link on the screen, or email invasive species at the Department of Primary Industries. So someone from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, Hunter Local Land Services or local council will contact you within 24 to 48 hours. So if they're really quite simple steps to follow, and for people who have never come across a cane toad before, this is really the right approach to take to make sure that you confirm that it is an actual cane toad and not a native frog. Thank you for your time today. And I'll now hand you over to Adrian Nicholas. He's a research entomologist who will talk about red imported fire ants.
Good afternoon. Sorry, yes, my name's Adrian Nicholas. I'm an entomologist with biosecurity and food safety. So we do a fair bit of biosecurity work. And today I want to talk to you about red imported fire ants. Some of the things that we're going to just touch on are the effect on the people, the effect on the local flora and fauna and the local environment, and how that all joins together a little bit. We'll talk about the RIFA experience at Port Botany briefly, just to emphasise the importance of this. And then after that, I'll just talk to you about what to look out for, nest identification, a little bit about the identification of the ant itself, perhaps touch on a little bit of its life history and ecology, and then afterwards a little bit about reporting, but the next speaker will give you a far better feedback on that. Okay, so in general, this is what you'd expect to see for a red imported fire ant. The reason it's so important is because it can sting you very. It stings it injects a poison into you with a stinger on the rear, which you can see there. And what it does in actual fact is it will hold on to you, bite you, and then run around in a circle while continuing to hold you and sting you in numerous things. So you often get a series of stings in a little semicircle if you have the misfortune of being stung. They sting en masse, so you're not likely to get one sting and one little semicircle. You would get lots of them, and then unfortunately, each ant can sting you multiple times. So there's a fair amount of pain involved in this. There are ants with stronger stings, but nevertheless, this is well known for being a very painful one. It feels a bit like burning, and you can see that person's arm on there. So first of all, you get intense itching, which incidentally lasts for a good number of weeks. the hives grow, they have a little red spot and a white center, they will come up very quickly. Those little hives turn into pimples with yellow pustules, and they last about a week. All the time, this is, of course, still quite painful, and then you get a certain amount of swelling, which, if you report this to the doctor, you may need some steroids or some other medication. So one of the most important things that I should say about this is, if you get stung by fire ants, then it's very important that you seek medical help. You may not need it, but I would certainly advise you to seek medical help. Okay. We've just been there. Okay. The other thing that happens is that in some people who are particularly susceptible to this sort of thing, so if you know that you are, say, allergic to bee stings or something like that, it is possible for you to have anaphylactic shock, which of course is life-threatening. You would get the hives, and first you'd have trouble breathing, some trouble swallowing, and it's mainly children that get anaphylactic shock, and in the community that represents about 1 or 2% of children. So you should certainly seek medical help. Okay. In the event that we get an infestation of red fire ants in an area, it's going to change the way we live within our environment. It's going to change our recreation. It's going to change a lot of things. You won't be going out for a picnic or a run around on the lawn with your bare feet. Mowing and gardening will become something that you have to wrap up more for. Sports fields and golf courses can get infected. In fact, those are the areas that you're likely to see, because red-imported fire ant has a tendency to occur in open areas, as opposed to, say, you're less likely to find it in areas of bushland, because that's not its preference. Okay. It's also likely to attack your pests and domestic animals, and they're of course going to have symptoms much like humans do. Some animals can be blinded by the poison, and other animals, small animals, will be killed. So it certainly will have an adverse effect. I think if we go to the next slide, it will have an adverse effect on insects and worms and plants and seeds. They're highly voracious. They're omnivores. They will strip a dead animal, so if there's a thing, but they will strip it to the bone. They can also have they'll kill lizards and what have you, and they just overpower them in just sheer numbers and sting them. So it really will make a big difference. Now, this pest has a preference for sweetness, liquids and what have you, so it likes nectar and insect honeydew, which is insect honeydew is that excrement that you get from, say, the rear end of an aphid when it's feeding on a plant. They love all that. They tend to protect that. So you will find them up in the plants and what have you, albeit that the nest is on the ground. But they like nectarines. Their favourite plants are sort of nectarines, cotton and passion vines. So those sort of sweetness and oil-bearing plants. This map shows you the area where red-imported fire ant or fire ants are likely to be able to inhabit if they occur in Australia. Now, it's that little green patch in Tasmania which is the least likely. So you can see from this map that it doesn't matter where you live in Australia, they are likely to occur to some point. The red areas, of course, being the most favoured areas. There has been some studies on what they predict would happen to wildlife in the event that fire ant becomes established. So we would be expecting to lose 40% of our birds, 38% of our mammals. You know, it would take out our reptiles, certainly would have a devastating effect on our frogs. And then it's going to impact on agriculture. And on that list, you can see a number of products and the numbers which represent the sort of losses that we would expect if it becomes established. One way of me trying to explain to you perhaps how important we envisage this pest is to look at what the effort that went into eradicating it when it was found in Portland Botany in 2014. So I've put down here some timelines, and if you look at the map, there's a little bit there in the middle of the map there, there's a sign that says port logistics. Now, in actual fact, there's a piece of dirt and open ground just in front of that building, and that's where the first New South Wales red-imported fire ant was detected. So it was discovered on the Friday. Immediately people went and started looking for it in the dockyard area. It was in actual fact found by aqueous entomologists who, for the most part, check containers and so on and so forth. But on this occasion, they were checking the soil and looking at the ants. All up, there were 5 ants, 5 nests detected. Not all of them were well established, so I think there was only one real well established one, but others were detected, and I'll show you how that's done in a minute. On the 2nd, which is only a few days later, we had a control centre set up just to the right of that site. We had 25 control staff in there and 400 people on the ground. That's a lot of people to motivate and get out there in that time. On the 5th of December, we had sniffer dogs searching that dockyard area. Now, those 48 hours previously, those sniffer dogs had been in Gladstone. They put them in the car and they drove them to the airport, to the dockyard, and they just travelled overnight. So they brought down the dogs, and then we put them to searching for that. In the meantime, we did some DNA testing on the fire ants, and we determined that those fire ants had come from Argentina. Now, as you may well be aware, there is a fire ants in the Queensland, in the Brisbane district, and so we wanted to determine whether or not they had come from there and not. We've already DNA'd all of those ants in Brisbane, so we know what their background is, and so we were able to prove that they were a new incursion and they had come on a shipping container from Argentina. We then, of course, set about tracing all those containers, the container movements, where they went and where they were offloaded and where the products in them went. On the 17th of December, which I remember well, it happens to be my birthday, we extended the site to 2 kilometres, and we checked all the homes and gardens and parklands and golf courses. So we're now outside the dockyard area, and we're looking for all those soil, mulches, manures, anything that would provide a suitable home for them. On the Saturday, we looked, 600 houses were visited and the gardens inspected with their residents. On Sunday, we shut down the entire runways of Sydney Airport and run the dogs across there, and there you can see the dog. And that took 4 hours. We had 11 aircraft sitting on the runway with lots and lots of people. It was very hot, and they were very unhappy. So the airport authorities were also keen to get the planes off the ground. You can imagine that this was quite a thing. It just demonstrates the extent to which and the importance that New South Wales government and the department puts on eradicating this pest. And surveillance carried on until 2016, when we actually declared that the eradication program had been a success. So that was 2 years of continued monthly surveillance, checking the sites where they'd been found. If we have the misfortune of having it, we could end in a situation where we would end up like those in southeast Queensland. In southeast Queensland, fire ants were first detected in 2001. Now, I know, because I've been there and had a look, that there have been numerous incursions. In fact, eradication almost happened at one stage, and one particular incursion was eradicated, but over time this has extended, and now we have sort of almost 100 kilometres width of fire ants, and we have 450,000 hectares infested. So what exactly are we talking about? What are we looking for? Well, this is a typical nest, a fire ant nest that you would see in the open. It's a mound of earth. It's about 20 or 30 centimetres high. It varies in shape, and it has distinctively no entrance or exit hole for the ants to go in and out. They actually enter through holes adjacent to this nest. If you are unsure about it, if you disturb that nest, and I suggest you do it with a very long stick, you will get a lot of ants, and you'll see them swarming out. There are there's 100, 250,000 per ant in every nest. And there are big nests. So there are nests with single queens, and there are nests with multiple queens. And as I understand it, up to 5 queens can be in a nest. It's not something that you should go too near. Just out of interest, so that you understand how the nest looks, the picture on the right is the picture of a nest if you poured molten aluminium in it, as this person did in America. So that's what the nest looks like under the ground. So when you actually are trying to control this, you come along with your chemical that you're going to inject, and you inject down into that nest, and the queen is somewhere down there in the middle. And that nest will just increase with size. Certainly, I don't suggest you pour aluminium in it. Don't try this at home. This is what the ant looks like. But if you look at the bottom left-hand picture, you can see that unlike other ants, which have maybe one size or a few sizes, this is a multiple-sized ant. It varies from 2 to 6 millimeters. The queen on the right there might be as much as 10, but the actual workers. Now, all the workers are females. The only males are produced at breeding time. They're born. The queen will then decide that she's going to leave that nest. She'll fly up into the air. The male will follow her. They'll mate on the wing. He then dies, and the queen flies off to start a new colony. And she does that a lot. She does that alone, and the first thing that she does is lay new workers. Okay, so to determine whether or not it's a fire ant, first of all, you have to say, well, they are actually quite small ant. They're not like a bull ant or anything else that you see out in the bush. They are multiple sized, as I say, and they are quite small, and they are a coppery brown, bronzy sort of colour, as you can see in the picture there. If you were to want to identify them, I'm not really sure that I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that you do, but this particular ant is identified by the fact that on its thorax it has no spines. On the end of it, it has a stinger, and then it has 2 petiole nodes. There are 10 segments in its antennae, and the last 2 make up the club segment at the end. So that's what you would be looking for if you were looking at it under a microscope, and what have you. I certainly wouldn't suggest that you try to catch some. but it is possible if you get a few on a stick and put a stick very quickly into a bag and then, you know, and seal it up. But it's not recommended. There's a lot of sites around the internet that will give you this information. Some of them belong to the department and what have you. So it brings me to the end. If you suspect that you've found some fire ants, I mean, if you touch it with a stick, you'll know if you see them rushing out. But just be aware that when they do rush out, not all of them will rush out towards you. They're going to rush out and they're going to climb up pieces of grass. So let's imagine that you've got a nest, you've got pieces of grass growing quite tallly all around it. Those ants, some of those ants will come out and attack you. Others will run up the grass and try to get to you at another point, or if you pass by. Do you see what I mean? In other words, they not only do they attack, but they ambush as well. Okay. So the best thing to do if you think you've found some fire ants is to report it to the hotline. You can send some photos, but not samples. We want to minimise the risk of spreading them, so we certainly don't want to start sending fire ants all over the countryside. But if you send a brief explanation of where you found it and your contact details, somebody in the department will get back to you very quickly. Okay, that's all I'd like to say about the fire ants. And now in terms of reporting all sorts of biosecurity issues, I'm going to hand you over to Rachel, who will lead you through that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks for that, Adrian. I see that we're running a little bit over time, so I'll try and make this one quick. So I'm just going to give a bit of a overview of how to report suspect exotic plant pests. I'm focusing on plant pests because that's where I work. Just to give you a bit of a definition of what I mean by a plant pest, it's basically any type of invertebrate or plant disease, any type of invertebrate that affects a plant and a plant disease. So, alrighty. Okay, so as a part of this Peri-urban environmental biosecurity network, we're actually promoting reports of our target pests through an app called My Pest Guide Reporter, which is a WA, Western Australia app. So basically within this network, we have, you've heard about a couple of different pests today. We have a few target pests on our list. So those include brown marmorated stink bug, exotic ants such as red imported fire ant that Adrian was just telling us about, things like yellow crazy ant, and exotic bees as well is on our list for the plant pests. So that could include things like bumblebees, which we don't have on mainland Australia, Asian honeybee, for example. There are a couple of other pests within our network that we're targeting, being cane toads and red-eared slider turtles. So if you do suspect any of these plant pests, like the ones on my screen here, we encourage people to report through this My Pest Guide Reporter app. So you can download the app onto your phone or your tablet. You can also send these reports in online on their website as well. So it's really simple to use. It gives you the ability to take up to 4 photos to attach to your report. It automatically clocks your GPS location, and it just asks for a little bit of information of where you found this pest and what you found, so a bit of a description. When you're sending in a report, there's just a few different programs that this app uses in terms of where the reports go to. So we just ask that if people can send it to the Peri-urban Environmental Biosecurity Network, bit of a mouthful, under the Send Report To button there. So once you've sent in a report and we have gone through it, we've finalised it, we can send you notifications. during that process, if say we require a sample, or we might just let you know that we've received the report and we've sent it on to one of our experts. Once it's all finalised, and if you have agreed to share your report, it'll be added to a community web page where other people can see what you've sent in. They won't be able to see any of your personal details or the exact location of where you've taken those photos. It's just more of an overview, so people in the community can see what's out there and what people are finding. Just quickly touching on, Eva mentioned this before, so we're asking for people to report suspect sightings of cane toads and the red-eared slider turtle through the Feral Scan app, not the My Pests guide. So moving back onto the exotic plant pests, so the invertebrates and the plant diseases, we have a few other reporting avenues. So if outside of our target pests of this network, or you may prefer to contact us directly, there's a few avenues there. So we've got the 1-800 number here on my screen, which is a national number, and you'll just be able to pick what state you're in, and then that will put you through to our biosecurity help desk, who will then send that report to us in plant biosecurity. We have an email address, which is just for reporting exotic plant pests, and an online form. So that's just on the DPI website. So you can just Google DPI report a biosecurity concern. This is just a screenshot of what that looks like. So we, like Adrian actually just mentioned before, we really like to receive a report of suspect sightings instead of people just sending in samples willy-nilly. It's really important for people to do this because, like Adrian said, it might be dangerous for you to take a sample. We don't want things being spread around the state. A lot of the time, if you take a really good quality photo, we can rule things out from being exotic. But if you can also take a photo, it can also let us know, helps us triage that and decide whether we do need a sample. And then we can give you some extra details on how to send that sample in. A good thing to do also, and obviously only if it's safe to do so or possible, is to contain the pest or the disease. Obviously diseases are a lot easier to contain, but containing pests is really important if you can. We've had a few cases where people have sent in really good photos, say of insects, and then we've asked them for a sample and they haven't been able to locate said insect again, which is a bit concerning sometimes. So if we do ask you for a sample, we will give you information on how to take that sample. So for a plant disease, we may need particular parts of a plant to be sent in. For the invertebrates, we might need you to kill it a certain way. Obviously, we don't really like receiving live insects through the post, just depends on what it is. And then we can tell you how to package those things as well. We may even, in some cases, depending on what the report is and where you're located, we may end up sending, say, a biosecurity officer out to take a sample, or we can sometimes send out sampling kits for you to use. So, moving along, if we do request a sample, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about where it goes and what happens. So all of our invertebrate plant pests are diagnosed at Orange Agricultural Institute in Orange, and plant diseases at EMAI in Camden in South Sydney there. So if we do ask for a sample, we'll ask you to fill out a form, which there's particular forms for each place, which just gives, you know, your information, a bit of extra information of what you found, where you found it, symptoms, and it just helps in that diagnostic process and just for our recording purposes as well. So this is a very generalized overview, step by step, what happens. It does vary between the different labs and depending on what the specimen is. But so we receive a sample, it basically gets checked into the system, so it's traceable, it has its own unique identifier. Then they will triage that sample, so they're receiving multiple things all the time, so they have to work out what gets priority. Some things may be time critical in terms of doing the diagnostic tests on. They may have to pass things on to other experts that might not be in that particular lab. Then they decide what diagnostic method they need to use. So a lot of our insects are ID'd morphologically, so looking at the insect's structure and using keys. Sometimes they will do molecular diagnostics on that. With our plant diseases, sometimes if it's a fungal disease, they'll throw it under the microscope and have a look, or if it's bacterial, they might need to culture it out. And viruses, for example, they might be able to use, if there's available, rapid stick tests, like a pregnancy test, to help triage and see if anything pops up there. Then they prepare the sample, do the diagnostic test, record the result, and let you know. And during this process, they may need extra information from you, or they may be updating you on that process and how it's going. So then a report is sent to you and you can find out what it is. In terms of fees and stuff, if someone's sending in a suspect exotic pest, it doesn't incur a fee. But if then we determine that it is an endemic, but sometimes it takes more testing to go down to species level, then there could be a cost involved there if the reporter is wanting that information. But definitely we ask people, if you're not sure about something, just report it, and there's not a cost involved at that point. Just to finish off, I've been speaking about our 2 different labs that we've got. So some of our scientists are being part of a National Science Week project that's happening next month. It's obviously all online now. So if you want to learn more about what they do and the different plant pests and diseases that they work with, I suggest jumping on this website here, the corridorproject.org website, and they've got a series of webinars coming up next month, which I reckon will be very interesting. Okay, that's me done. Thanks.